Hey everyone, this is something I don't usually talk about publicly, but I think it's important to explain, especially because people might see me in a wheelchair one day and walking another, and they know kind of my backstory, and I work in a restaurant, and understandably have some questions. Part of why I'm talking about this now is because I'm at a point in my life where I really don't want to hide parts of myself anymore. And because I'm somewhat public online, I attend conventions and meetups, there's always a chance for someone who sees me using one of my wheelchairs and starts making assumptions or spreading rumors without any sort of context. I'd rather people hear the truth directly from me rather than build their own version of the story. I have something called Body Integrity Identity Disorder, or BIID for short. It's a rare neurological condition that's been discussed in medical literature for decades. BIID involves a persistent mismatch between how someone's brain perceives their body and how their body physically is. In simple terms, the brain believes a certain part of the body shouldn't function the way it does. In my case, that mismatch presents as paraplegia. My legs physically work, which many of you have clearly seen in my content, and some of you have seen in person. But my brain consistently feels like they shouldn't. It's honestly difficult to explain if you've never experienced something like that before, but for me, it's a very real and persistent feeling for actually a really long time. It's really only been more recently that I've started seeking help, researching BIAD more deeply, and truly understanding what these feelings and needs actually meant. Honestly, even the psychologist I spoke with wasn't really familiar with BIAD because of how rare and under-discussed it is. They had to spend some time researching the condition further themselves, and that honestly reinforced it for me, just how misunderstood and uncommon this condition really is. Researchers believe BIID may be connected to how the brain maps the body ownership and movement, particularly in the areas like I'm probably going to butcher this name, but the parietal lobe. It's not something I chose, it's not something I roleplay, and it's certainly not something I can just kind of snap out of it. The closest comparison people sometimes understand is gender dysphoria, where someone's internal sense of self doesn't fully align with their physical body. BIID is similar in structure, but instead of gender, it relates to a physical ability or the body configuration. In both cases, the feelings are deeply rooted and very real to the person experiencing them. I want to be very clear about a few things because I know this topic can raise concerns. I am not pretending to be disabled. I'm not mocking disabled people, and I'm not trying to speak over people who live with a permanent physical disability. Sometimes I use wheelchairs because it helps reduce the mental distress that comes from that mismatch between my brain and my body. There are times when my BIID becomes more intense, and during those periods, I rely much more heavily on my wheelchairs and tend to function more in line with how my brain perceives my body. For me, functioning similarly to a paraplegic during those times can help reduce the distress and constant mismatch the condition creates. There's also a practical side to it, too. I use a manual wheelchair, and honestly, you'll probably see me in this chair more often because it's lightweight, it's easier to transport, easier to load in my car, and it's just much more practical for travel and conventions overall. I also added a smart drive because I really don't have the upper body strength to push long distances, deal with any sort of steep ramps, or handle rough terrain for extended periods of time. And if you've ever tried pushing a manual wheelchair through hotel carpet, you already know that that stuff feels like you're moving through like wet cement. So the smart drive becomes an absolute lifesaver at conventions and the hotels because it helps me use my chair longer and more safely without completely exhausting myself, especially if I'm fursuiting. I also own a Permobil F3 power wheelchair. You probably won't see me in it as often, mainly because the transportation is a lot more difficult. Traveling with a power chair usually means that you need a van or a trailer, and if I'm taking it to conventions or traveling longer distances, I also have to constantly think about charging it. But on the flip side, it's significantly easier on my body, especially while fursuiting. I don't use it all the time, but on days where my energy, pain, or mental load is higher, it helps me function and exist more comfortably without overdoing things. For me, mobility aids are tools that help me manage my life responsibly, not something I use to prove anything. I also want to say this clearly because it matters. I'm not taking away resources from people who physically need them. All of my mobility equipment was purchased with my own money. I'm not using disability benefits. I didn't use insurance. I'm not using any sort of accommodations meant for someone else. If a resource or a space is specifically needed by someone with a permanent physical disability, I step aside. Full stop. And just as importantly, I will never injure myself to achieve what BIID tells me my body should be. That is not my goal, and it never will be. I manage this safely and responsibly. Thankfully, my BIID is not as severe as some of the more extreme documented cases you might see online or discussed in medical literature. BIID itself is extremely rare, with only a limited number of documented cases, though researchers believe it's likely underreported because people are afraid of the stigma, kind of like myself, or just being misunderstood, which, again, is, something that I fear about. There's no universally agreed upon treatment right now, so most approaches focus on therapy, coping strategies, support systems, and harm reduction. Thankfully, as I said, mine is not so severe, so honestly, just using the wheelchairs themselves, that's more than enough for me, and is a great coping mechanism for my BIID. I know this may be confusing or difficult for some people to understand, and honestly, I don't expect everyone to fully get it. I've had so many conversations where it's gone south, or it's wrong, or they just don't understand. But I hope that at least this helps explain my experience a little bit better. And if this topic makes you feel uncomfortable or it's difficult for some of you, honestly, I genuinely understand. Disability is a deeply personal and important subject. And the last thing I would ever want for someone to feel is mocked, disrespected, or invalidated by my experience. I'm honestly still learning how to navigate all this myself, and I've been doing my best to approach it with honesty, such as this video, responsibility, and respect for the people around me. At the end of the day, I'm sharing this because I don't want to hide anymore. I want to be open about my BIID, and I want to feel accepted and comfortable existing openly, whether that's around friends, at conventions, or just everyday life. And honestly, just like anyone else, I want to feel accepted in the furry fandom and the communities and friends that I care about without feeling that I have to hide parts of myself out of fear or rumors or misunderstanding. And to those of you who are my friends or part of my community, I genuinely appreciate your support and understanding, especially during times when I do choose to go out in one of my wheelchairs at conventions or just everyday life. Sometimes support is simple as treating me normally, being by my side if I'm on wheels, asking respectful questions, or just letting me exist without assumptions. This video isn't about convincing anyone of anything. It's just me being honest about a condition that's a part of my life and explaining it in my own words. So, thank you for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself. I'll see you on the next video. Bye.